All right, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. So I've got a new deck, which if you're a fan of Brian Weissman's channel, you've already seen the starting point for this deck. And so if not, I'm not sure why you haven't checked his material out yet. If you like mine, you'll love his as well. Definitely go look up Brian Weissman in YouTube and see what you can find there. But in the meantime, I do want to say that the deck has evolved since the initial videos that he's released. And this is sort of what I like to do. And Brian's, I know he's been busy lately as well, but he's been providing feedback from a distance and texting him my changes. We've been discussing things. But what I tend to do is just hammer away at a build and try to tweak, tune, and tinker with it as much as possible. So with that in mind, this is the current iteration of the deck that we have called Bull Szat. Because partners themselves are quite a bit of BS, and they're very ban-worthy. It's a ban-worthy mechanic. I've proffered some suggestions in the past. I'll mention it here on ways that partners can be fixed. I'll tell you what's wrong with it, but I don't want to get too much. I don't want to go too much far down that rabbit hole. Partners. The problem with partners is that you get one additional resource over your opponent. You get 2 commanders to their 1, and it doesn't really matter which 2 commanders you pick. The fact of the matter is you get to start with 7 cards in hand plus 2 cards in your command zone. And the opponent gets to start with 7 cards in hand plus 1 card in the command zone. So you're already up a card and you haven't even started the game. So first, the fix to the card advantage or card disadvantage mechanic that I see is that you should essentially just mulligan. You should start with 7 cards in hand and then put 1 back, and that's your starting hand. If you mulligan again, you start with 5. That would even out the number of cards that each player has access to at the beginning of the game. It's not elegant, and it's not, I don't love it, it's not great, but it would balance the imbalance that exists in partners. However, there's a second imbalancing mechanic for the partners mechanic, which is that if you have a single commander and you play it, and that commander goes back to the command zone somehow, it's killed, exiled, or whatever, the next time you play it, you have to play a commander tax of +2 mana. So each time you play your commander, you pay an additional 2 mana. That's every commander that you, as the owner of just 1 commander in the command zone, every time you cast any commander that you control, which happens to be exactly 1, a set of all of them, you must increase the cost by 2. But with partners, you actually can bypass this tax. I can actually cast each of my commanders once without paying commander tax on either one of them, despite the fact that I have played 2 instances of a commander from the command zone. The fact that they're different commanders is irrelevant to the actual mechanics of Magic the Gathering. So that as human beings, we go, well, they're different, so therefore it's different. But in terms of gaining an advantage on the board and gaining a mana advantage in tempo, the mechanics of the game don't care about those things. If I increase the cost of 1, if I play a commander from the command zone, in my view, another fix, or maybe the other fix, or maybe both of these fixes need to happen to balance partners. What should happen is if I play Rograkh, Tevesh Szat should now cost its normal casting cost +2. If I play Tevesh Szat, Rograkh should cost its normal casting cost +2, because no matter which commander I grab from the command zone, the tax should be a command zone tax, not a commander specific individual card tax. It should be just when something is played from the command zone, there is a command zone tax applied. And then if they wanted, frankly, like you could have, 5 or 6 partners in the command zone. Under those conditions, potentially, it'd be completely ridiculous in terms of access to color. But perhaps the going down a card proposal that I started out with might not be necessary if the command tax were just shared, despite the fact that you get additional resources in your sideboard by playing partners. But despite the fact that you have an additional hand size, I honestly, I really don't know. But it feels to me like the mechanic is so broken that what I was running into is that I just could not enjoy the format anymore. I just couldn't. I was trying to. I wanted to. I was desperately doing everything I could possibly fathom to maintain my enjoyment of the format, and it was just sinking away because many games were devolving down into my opponent throwing a partner at me who was a must answer card, and then following it up by another partner who was a must answer card, and I would scramble to deal with the first one and then not successfully deal with the second, and I would get overwhelmed. And that was bad enough. That was the Timna and Crom problem, or another instance would be Timna and the green and blue commander who has a 4-mana activation cost just like a Jam Day Tome. So both of those combinations were extremely broken and difficult to deal with and not super fun. Again, because my opponent was able to pressure me with multiple cards from the command zone, and I could only draw on one card in my command zone to answer it, and it was just totally imbalanced. And of course the tax issue. But on top of all that, I started facing a deck that was created by, well, I don't know who created it, but the first time I saw it, it was played by a guy named Dawts, D-A-W-T-S. And it was a version of Tevesh, Szat, and Rograkh. And what I realized was, at first I thought, why would you ever play this 0-drop and weaken yourself when there are so many? I'll give you an example. I actually have one in my deck. Look at Jessica Thrice Reborn. Jessica Thrice Reborn partner can be your commander. So this is a crazy good effect on a commander. You could, for example, play this and have, well, not this, but you could play something like this and have 2 planeswalkers in your sideboard. Literally, like planeswalker being one of the hardest permanent types to deal with, and now you have double planeswalkers coming out of the sideboard doing some really nasty stuff. And so I was thinking, why in the world would you ever play Rograkh? Well, it turns out that a 0 casting cost creature on demand, it's not that a 0 casting cost creature exists that's the problem, although many go all the way back to a deck called Fruity Pebbles or Cocoa Pebbles if you want to look up some ancient Magic history. There's two different variations in the same deck. Both revolved around 0 casting cost creatures being super broken and dumb. If you look at what was the other deck? Tolarian Academy during Urza's reign, when you could play 4 of them. That deck involved around was revolving around playing 0 casting cost artifact creatures as well, Ornithopters and stuff, to power a Giant Academy, also being just super broken and dumb. Neither of those decks, as bad as they were deterministic. So you didn't always have. You had cards that wanted to work with 0 casting cost creatures. You didn't always have the creatures, or sometimes you had the creatures but you didn't have the cards. In this deck, because it's commander, it's not like that. So when I draw opening hand where I have Mox Amber, which really wants a legendary creature or planeswalker in play to do anything, I always have a 0-drop to go with it. So Mox Amber in this deck is literally a Mox Ruby that sometimes upgrades itself, at least on turn 1, right? And of course if they kill Rograkh, fine, but I've already got my mana because I can play land, play the Amber, cast my commander. Now they can kill it, but it's too late. I'm already going to get the mana. The mana ability can't be responded to. So it's just Mox Ruby on turn 1, which is insane, right? Like having access to Mox Ruby when nobody else in the format gets access to that card is a little bit nuts. And there are many other things that are super abusive with it. Springleaf Drum is pretty good with it. Calling the Weak, which basically means that you can get a mana of any color. It's a little more expensive than the Mox since you have to pay 1, but on the next turn you can throw your commander down and you have 3 mana, including 1 of any color, which is great. Calling the Weak is just completely insane. The Calling the Weak has, because it's 1 to get 4, it's the same as 0 to get 3. So these 2 cards are almost identical, although you can spend the mana on anything with this in terms of effect. And so essentially I'm running 2 Jeweled Lotuses. What's interesting about this deck is I started out playing Lion's Eye Diamond. I think Brian's builds had it at the time of recording. I'm not even playing it because I don't think the deck needs it. It was a little all in, a little risky against, Force of Will decks. I'm just not sure that the deck needs it, although it does fuel some really gross and powerful things when you can combine it with like Underworld Breach. But overall, the deck seems to be playing just fine without it. We'll see if it makes its return, but for now I'm leaning against. I'm leaning on no. And so, let's see, what do I want to talk about? Well, I suppose what I should talk about is what this deck does, or why it's a little bit nuts. So essentially, what this deck's doing is it's playing. Of course, we're playing a number of, if not most, the majority of cards that we absolutely always hate to face when we're playing Brea. You know, Dark Ritual, Necropotence on turn one, stuff like that. Liliana the Veil, Yawgmoth's Will, Opposition Agent, Fiery Confluence, Vandal Blast, Ragavan is in this deck, Dark Confidant's in this deck. So there's a lot of stuff that we hate to see. And in general, it's a good idea to, you know, when we're the opponent. So in general, it's a good idea to put cards like that in your deck. But more specifically, this deck has a very... it actually has a game plan. It's not just a collection of good cards. It is very specifically geared towards suppressing your opponent's ability to... Basically, what you're trying to do is get ahead on mana using rituals and artifact mana. You're trying to get ahead on mana while suppressing your opponent's ability to do the same by very aggressively attacking their artifacts. And when I say very aggressively, I mean about as aggressively as I could think to make it, with very minor exceptions. So there's more artifact removal in the farm. I mean, you could literally build a deck with like 99. I'm sure that it would be possible to fill the deck with artifact removal if you really wanted to. But in terms of the highest quality, most impactful artifact removal, this deck runs, I think, all of it. But if I'm missing some, let me know. A perfect example, by force, single card that will just smoke like all of your opponent's board potentially. We've got Fiery Confluence, also has the capability to kill up to 3 artifacts your opponents control. And of course, Mana Dorks as well, maybe kill a couple of those, take out mana. Rack and Ruin, an incredibly, it's a funnily overlooked card, but incredibly flexible, easy to cast, multi-target removal card for artifacts that's pretty stellar in a format that's just dominated by fast mana like this one has become. A Braid, just for the flexibility. There are still cards like Dark Confidant and stuff that you want to kill, Ragavan. And when there aren't, there should be, generally speaking, a target for this card almost all the time. And you've got Angerous Rampage, same flexibility area as a Braid, except this one also takes out Planeswalkers, so it's good in the mirror sometimes. And then what else? We've got Shattering Spree is in this deck, very hard to counter. An opponent sometimes sets up with a bunch of artifacts and they've got a counter spell, and you tutor and you go get Shattering Spree, and you replicate it, boom, 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 boom. And outside of some extraordinarily limited and lesser played solutions like Flusterstorm or Mindbreak Trap or a couple of other cards, you're going to typically blow them out here. You're just gonna target their best thing twice and target everything else once, and then they can counter one of those cards and maybe keep like their second best card, but that's it, right? And of course, Vandal Blast, which really doesn't need much explanation, has been used for a long time in the decks that we build, as well as Kolaghan's Command, which can 2-for-1 the opponent and frequently does. Almost always, right? You're going to get a card from their hand and an artifact, or you're going to kill something in play and get an artifact, or occasionally you'll kill like a Mana Elf and take a card or whatever. This card can sometimes act like Time Walk when the opponent has no cards in hand. You can just hit them during their upkeep, take out whatever they drew. If it wasn't an instant, they can't play it, and maybe kill something on the way out, or occasionally, rarely, Raise Dead. There aren't a lot of creatures in this deck, very, very few, but the Raise Dead effect can matter. One example where it very well might is Fury. Really interesting addition to the deck, really recent addition to the deck as well. This card's kind of nuts. It's an incredible tempo swing, no matter which way you play it. So if you're playing it for 0, it's going to often kill multiple targets, the reason you're doing it, or it's killing something critical. But frequently you're playing it and just kind of blowing the opponent out of the water, not spending mana to play it, killing multiple things on their side of the board, and then using your mana to continue to pressure them and develop. Or sometimes you can hard cast it. When you hard cast it, it also has a huge impact, usually on the board, killing multiple things or killing even one thing, like a Flame Tongue Kavu situation. But but leaves behind a 3/3 double strike that then applies incredible amount of pressure in very short order on either life totals or planeswalkers, typically requiring your opponent to deal with it, meaning that you're going to, under those conditions, you're going to kill multiple things in play, as well as force a response from your opponent, which further sinks them even deeper into the card disadvantage hole. And of course, like I said, sometimes you can evoke this thing out, exiling a red card, and then K-command it back to your hand, and just do it again. So really kind of a gross, sneaky interaction there. There's a number of other card advantage engines built into the deck, but mostly, if you'll notice, the deck's focused on really just a couple of things. It's focused on crushing your opponent's resources, and then generating tons of mana on your side. And the reason for that is because Tevesh Szat is almost entirely the card advantage engine you need. There's a couple of cards in here that are just so broken that we just could not. There's really no. It's very hard to justify not playing them if you have the mana to cast them. Ad Nauseam is one of them, and Necropotence is the other. Even though the curve on this seems a little weird, it's still pretty. It's still pretty good. I think that I can. Let's see if I can. There used to be a way that you can. Analysis. So here you can take a look at the mana curve. I don't think it has an average mana curve here anymore, but if you look at it, you can see, 6/0 drops, 17/1 drops, 18/2 drops. So we're talking about 35, 41, and then 51, 57. So basically 57 cards that cost 3 or less, and then 31 lands. So you're talking about 88 cards. So there's well, I mean, hell, I could have just done it this way. 88, 89, 88 cards plus 10 in the deck. Don't forget the 2 on the sideboard. So there's literally only 10 cards that cost 4 or 5. So when you're paying 3 life to draw a card, you're not happy about it, but you're not unhappy about it. It's okay. When you're paying less than that, when you're down in this range, you're very happy about it. Quite happy, actually. So all these nasty card drawing engines that give you some play in the event that they can deal with Tevesh Szat, give you some recovery, or just give you an alternate path to victory. Sometimes you just cast Ad Nauseam, draw 15 cards, and then proceed to break your opponent's back. One thing with this deck, it's not necessarily you're not trying to cast Ad Nauseam and then like storm them out or go off. It's not like a go off deck. You're just burying them in card advantage and disruption. So when you cast it, you want to leave yourself enough life total to finish the game out. You don't want to go too crazy with it. There is a number of ways that you can pressure your opponent into losing if they do not concede. Most games end on turn 1 with this deck, or turn 2. In most cases, your opponent concedes almost immediately. For that reason, I don't recommend this deck necessarily as the most fun thing in the world. In fact, it's a deck that I feel needs to be banned. I feel that partners actually just need to be banned or fixed. But I'm going to play something that I think needs to be banned to try to show you why it needs to be banned, how it's ruining the Commander format in my view. And if you observe the gameplay and you think it's healthy and it's not ruining the Commander format and doesn't need to be banned, that's okay. I don't mind you disagreeing with me, but I definitely want to do my best to demonstrate, basically provide you the evidence that I've looked at as to how and give you my conclusions and show you how I've reached those conclusions, and then leave it to you to reach your own conclusions. So that's kind of the point of this deck. I am running. I wonder if there's anything questionable in here. Perhaps you might wonder about a card like Goblin Bombardment, Goblin or the Abyss, maybe. Now, of course, there's only like 4 creatures in the deck here, but we actually can pump out some pretty giant ones, via Karn animating like a Thran Dynamo or something. Other Karn producing robots. Urza's Saga making robots to beat our opponent's face in. And we can also do the old trick with the Abyss where we just target something like an opposition agent and then turn it into an artifact in response and fizzle the Abyss. So it's not like we can't do things of that nature, and which is actually important because it's one of the ways that we can kill planeswalkers. We can Shatter Skull smashing them or Fury them, but sometimes you just need to attack the planeswalker and kill it, and that's one of the routes that we can take to do that. But yeah, you might wonder like about cards like perhaps the Abyss, or perhaps you're wondering like why is Goblin Bombardment in there? And the main thing is a lot of the removal in this deck is modal. It's flexible removal that can target multiple things, and you would very much prefer not to have to target creatures. You want creatures to be irrelevant, so you can focus all your removal on their other permanent types and their hand. And so you're gonna invest. So you'd rather collect a brutality a card out of their hand than have to kill a creature with it. And if you can not escalate, because anytime you can save a card, that's a good thing, right? So if there's no targets in play, you can just focus it on their hand. Same thing's true for all the rest. So the idea behind that is bombardment actually hoses a lot of decks and a lot of commanders in a way that's unique, I think, to Tevesh Szat, in that you can, for example, play turn 2 bombardment, throw down Rograkh, and immediately kill like a Bird of Paradise, a Ragavan, a Dark Confidant, something that's real nasty and threatening or enabling for your opponents. But later on, of course, if you get Tevesh Szat down with bombardment, it is almost impossible for your opponent to keep a creature in play. Like, they won't even try most of the time. And if they won't try, well, then you can just generate a big army on the ground and then ultimate Tevesh Szat and steal your opponent's board, or you can just continue to draw cards, but you have free reign to continue to take over the game, and that's what you're looking for. The other thing with bombardment is it gives you, of course, it's impossible if you control that card for your opponent to steal any of your creatures, which sometimes is relevant. You can do things like evoke Fury into play to deal 4 damage, and then sacrifice it to bombardment and ping out that extra 5th damage, which sometimes is relevant. You can do things like shoot planeswalkers down with Tevesh Szat over time. You can feed it to ready tokens. So there's just a lot of little things that you can do that turn out to be pretty useful with the Goblin Bombardment, and I believe it's worth the slot. The most important of which, though, is suppressing some of the nastier decks that are very quick to get their game plan going and can give this deck. Basically, the idea is if a deck is not fast enough to keep up with this deck, we're not worried about it, and we're not going to put cards in to beat it. The deck's already beating those decks. What we need to do is focus on where the weaknesses are and just shore up the weaknesses. So that's why you see that the deck has way too many artifact removal cards and creature removal cards and stuff, because the idea here is, and reusable creature removals, the idea is find the is that over the course of testing I've located how opponents, like the chinks in my own armor, and I'm putting I'm reinforcing those, basically, how my opponent's putting pressure on me. So outside of that, I guess there isn't a ton to discuss, but if there's anything that you're interested about in terms of what's in the deck and you'd like me to specifically comment on, please let me know. One final thing I suppose I will say is that the primary kill in this deck, for anyone who does not concede, the primary killing is concession. But when people do not concede, the primary kill card is actually Death Cloud. And generally speaking, what happens is you get lands and artifacts, and you're aggressively killing artifacts. You're keeping them off artifact mana. And this Death Cloud functions just like Winter Orb did in Brea, where you would kill their artifact mana and then play Winter Orb to shut down all their lands. Except in this deck, you kill their artifact mana and then you play Death Cloud to kill every card that they're holding, all of their creatures in play, and all of their lands in one shot. And that leaving you with your commander, which is a card drawing engine to recover, and usually some artifact mana in play, which is pretty gross. So that's kind of it, and I think we should run through some games. In fact, I've got quite a few games to play, and I will just look at the games for today. I think maybe I'll look at the last 7. So if you want to look at the record for the deck, you can see there's really interesting here. Look at, I'm getting just destroyed by Colossum here on 6-3, and today is 6-11. So there's been an iteration of this deck, and then later on, I think yesterday being the 10th, I think I had like a mixed bag against him. So the games against Colossum, I'll kind of cover a little bit. You can see some quite a few, like it's about 50-50 honestly. Um, but as I lost, what I was looking at was what are the cards that my opponent's using to beat me? Can I use those cards to beat them? Can I defend myself with those cards? And what was happening is the answer was yes, because he was beating me with a mono red deck. So I'll show you, I'll just take the most recent loss right here, and then we'll run through it, and then we'll talk about the wins. All right, so the most recent loss against Colosseum. So this is what I'm dealing with. This is yet another card that this 100% needs to be banned, right? Like this Ragavan cannot be a commander that is allowed in any like this card makes absolutely no sense, because it literally comes down into play and you have, well, one turn to remove it or block it, and if you don't, well, blocking is damn near impossible against a mono red deck, so you pretty much you just remove it or die. And if you don't remove it, I mean, it's really die, because you fall way behind in tempo and cards. They're generating both mana and cards beginning as soon as they untap on turn 2. And it's also extremely problematic because it bypasses, because you can dash in with it and do things that way. And once you're playing against your own deck, you're in a lot of trouble. So here, this could be a keep. Shatterskull Smashing is a mana source. And Deadly Rollick is a free way to remove Ragavan. And if I do draw a land, then I have another way to kill it. Plus I have by force to possibly take out some artifact mana. But I decide, no, it's just not quite good enough. So I mulligan. This hand is all dressed up with nowhere to go. It has absolutely no kind of mana to go with the Mox Opal. It's just nothing. So this is an easy mulligan. So we mulligan again. And this is one of the ways that, you can lose it with this stack, of course. You can mulligan to death with everything. This is a reasonable keep, though. We can go turn 1 Springleaf Drum, and then we've got Ragavan, who can then provide mana on turn 2. We can play a land. We can Ritual, that would give us 3, and Springleaf Drum is 4. So we won't have enough to play the commander. But what we could do, possibly, is just Dreadbore away the Ragavan on turn 2, and then on turn 3 play a land, and then get the commander out. So this is not great, but also, by the way, I'm not using Dreadbore anymore. This is an example of a card that this actually became Goblin Bombardment, and it would have been extremely, like, much better as Goblin Bombardment. However, so I'm going to mulligan, and I decided to mulligan like this because I do need to hope to draw a land. I need to kill Ragavan if, potentially, right? And of course, I'm going second here, so I'm in big trouble anyway, but yeah, opponent leads off with Ragavan, gets a Mox, gets a Soul Ring, gets a Relic of Progenitus, and passes. And this is what Commander has become from my point of view, running cEDH games now and running this deck. Pretty much Commander has stopped being a format of interactive development and positioning, and is devolved into a binary opening hand check. If your opening hand is bad or fair, usually it's a mulligan. If your opening hand is busted, you keep it, and then the opponent does the same. And if the opponent does not do the same, if they don't have a busted hand and you do, you win. If you have a busted hand and they don't, typically, the roles are reversed or whatever. And if you both have something broken, then you get to play Magic. And that's it. There's the small window where neither of you has something super broken, and in that case you can play Magic, but that is few and far between. And frankly, if you're not doing something busted or have a solution to a busted start, you probably shouldn't keep. Here, I knew I was doomed because I didn't have a broken start. I was only hoping, as I said, that I could somehow keep up with that my opponent had a fair start. Small hope indeed. And as soon as I realized that I cannot interact with my opponent on this turn, I concede, because the game is over. I'm going to get hit by Ragavan. My opponent's going to start playing my deck against me. He's going to have 6 mana next turn. And yeah, I mean, there's literally no point in playing this game at all. So that's what losing a game of Commander looks like. You just look at your opponent's hand. And now let's go into what winning looks like. And unfortunately, disappointingly, frankly, winning looks almost the exact same, except flip it around. So that was the last game that I lost. It was 2 o'clock yesterday, and you can see I haven't lost since. So we'll run through the rest, and we'll see what happens. So game against Colossum. And as I said, we'll see the deck evolve further as we go. So there'll be a few cards. I'll point them out if they are no longer in the mix, right? Like if I've removed them. Here, of course, we have a very broken start, and this is what we're looking for. We get turn 1 Tevesh Szat. This is not uncommon for this deck at all. Last game was the exception, not the rule. Opponent has turn 1 Ragavan. Of course, I'm going second again. Dreadbore just irritates me to see this card. Like, it just does not belong in this deck. It needs to be, like, this deck needs to be Goblin Bombardment, but, I mean, this card, but, you know, it's fine. All right, so Rograkh, which now gives us red, and, of course, we can then eat Rograkh and produce that mana. So imagine if this is Bombardment here, I would just actually play Mana Vault. I would have 3 and 1 is +3, so I would have 7 mana. I would play Bombardment, Tevesh Szat, kill Ragavan, game over. But I still have Tevesh Szat, which is pretty darn good against a Ragavan. And my opponent can't clear. Yeah. Then he's got a commander that does nothing. And it makes his commander look so like weak and addressable. Like, geez, that card's terrible. It has to attack and deal damage in order to be good. But remember, I had to produce 6 mana or 5 mana on turn 1 in order to make his commander look like it's not good. His commander is stupidly good and ban-worthy, but, you know, anyway. So he plays Commander's Plate. This is definitely a card that could be a problem for me, since it gives it protection from each color not in his color identity. It does mean, though, that I can kill his commander with my red cards. I've noticed this card showing up quite a bit. It is actually a very frustrating card to face sometimes, and much, much worse when you're playing Brea and it gains, and the opponent potentially is, you know, not playing red or whatever, or even when they are, like, just the fact that they protection from 3/4 of your deck or whatever. But in this case, not too bad. We've got multiple answers for all of this, so we'll just go ahead and run through that. Like, just yet another disruption/solution. So I just decided that I'm going to play it a little safe here. I'm just going to kill Ragavan. I don't want to mess around with that card even being in play. And I don't want to get dashed. So I'm just going to do this. And if my opponent wants to replay it, that is totally fine. If he's got something else to do, that's fine as well. I have 2 Planeswalkers in play now. It's turn 2. Opponent sacks to draw a card and has almost nothing, and now we're just going to plus up. I'm going to throw away a card, and at this point my opponent realizes that the game is over, and that, as I said, is what a game of Commander has become now. It is about just dark ritualing out broken stuff as fast as you can. Alright, so moving on to the next game. DK Magic 1. We'll run through all of them, and you tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm mischaracterizing Commander, then I'm open to your input on that, but I'm not sure that is the case. You will see, in fact, so every time you sit down and your opponent has a Commander that has blue in it, it's almost always a win. And blue is the most powerful color in Magic, so that should tell you something about where we're at with this deck and how degenerate and broken it is. That the most powerful color almost always guarantees you a win. In fact, I don't believe I've ever lost to a blue deck with this deck at all. So another insane start. This is what we're looking for. And an opening hand of Ragavan and Tevesh. When our bull, we want maximum Bullzat. All right, so we're gonna run out the Mana Vault. And then I was thinking about how I wanted to run this through, and I decided, you know what, this works out fine. We'll just go into Worn Power Stone, and then get into their hand and figure out what's going on. I'm trying to remove, like, if they have a Braid or something, it would be pretty bad for me. So let's take out whatever they've got. Turns out they've got this land that comes into play tapped or acts as a giant Nevinyrral's Disc plus. So we'll go ahead and take out the Howling Mine, just leave my opponent with, you know, 4 or 5 lands, basically, depending on how you read that hand. So we'll leave that up here. And yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lands. All right, so opponent's gonna draw and look at their hand and realize they've got no action whatsoever, and they're facing turn 2. Turn 1, Inquisition you, turn 2, Tevesh Szat, and they scoop to that, and they're rightfully so. As I said, this deck kills on turn 1 most of the time. Just like the game against Ragavan, I played turn 1 Tevesh Szat, Made some blockers. My opponent was really not able to do much of anything. Made another planeswalker and he scooped. But for all intents and purposes, the game was over on turn one. So let's there's another. So turn one kill. Let's see how this plays out. Red Lions Burn. This is without the LED in the deck. All right, opponent's playing Tagnar, a really interesting creature. Oh wait, no, this isn't the one that I was thinking of. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't, if I'm playing green red, I wouldn't play this. Sorry, I was thinking of a different creature. This is one I wouldn't recommend playing, but you know, it's cool. I mean, you do you, opponent, and in the meantime, I'm gonna do me, and that means something pretty degenerate here. So I'm gonna go ahead and Chrome Mox away a Dreadbore, and play a City of Traders. I now have enough mana to. I'm gonna go and play Rograkh so that. Again, 0 casting cost breaks a lot of things. So now I have Jessica's Will, and I can do the both. I get 3 cards plus 6 mana because my opponent mulligans. So target them and boop. And the cards I find are, unfortunately, my Death Cloud, which means I won't. So this is going to stay exiled. This is a disappointing outcome because if it's not exiled, we can pretty much retrieve it from the graveyard, but we can't really get it out of exile. Not Death Cloud. Unfortunately, it is what it is. I'm just going to have to try to figure out how to win this game by playing that Gilded Lotus into Chandra. And, you know, I only have, what is that, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana on turn 1 and a card drawing engine plus a commander that ancestrals every turn. And if that's the best I can do, it's the best I can do. It's a little disappointing, but, you know, I'm going to have to suffer. And yeah, opponent concedes because once again, this is a turn 1 format, and that is a turn 1 kill. And I am not joking about how ban worthy all this stuff is. This is the cumulative effort of Brian and I trying to prove that the format's ban list needs help desperately. But as I said, let's enjoy it. Let's enjoy the ride, and you can certainly tell me if you don't agree, if you see it differently. That's totally fine. I'm just double checking my mic here. Yeah, okay, we should be good to go. Sorry. Every once in a while my mic goes out, and if I don't check it, I'll regret it. Anyway, opponent's playing a a non-serious commander. So I feel a little bad, but not too bad because, you know, I have cEDH in my comments, and that's what we're gearing up to do. So we have we can kill their board, 6 ways from Sunday here. So we'll just start out. And this is just going to be a matter of pacing now. My opponent mulligans as well. So how do you pace this hand out? So I get Karn, which is, pretty good with the Abyss. Pretty good on turn 2 in general. Hoping not to, that was nice. I was hoping not to have to imprint. I don't know which one of these I want to imprint least. In this case, the Deluge looks like it's not going to be too useful because the Abyss should just continue to eat away whatever my opponent plays, and then Death Cloud can clean it up afterwards. So, and then with Confluence in my hand, the ability to kill artifacts and everything. So I'm just going to take my time here, though. I'm not feeling pressured, and I feel like I can wait just one more turn for Karn. Use this opportunity to just go get my my one come into play tap land. There's Bombardment there showing up, and I'm going to go ahead and imprint here Deluge, as I said. And skip straight to Mr. Ancestral Recall himself. We'll go ahead and make some blockers, and from there, I mean, I've got Bombardment now, so if my opponent plays a creature, for example, I'll just kill it and drive on. I mean, how do you want to kill it, right? All right, a singular creature that the Abyss can eat all day long sounds perfect. So we'll go ahead and just draw some cards here and play the Abyss, play a land for the turn, and play Bombardment. I believe I'm playing land. Oh, no, I'm not playing land because of the City of Traders. That's why I'm holding Smashing. So at this point, my opponent has to sack that. And this combination between the Abyss and Bombardment is pretty gross because what it means is that if my opponent tries to get around the Abyss by puking out a bunch of tokens, I can just gun them down, pop, 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 and then the Abyss will eat the thing that I actually care about. And of course, in some weird way, my opponent's kind of on a clock. Like I'm capable of dealing bonus damage every turn. Yeah, just a flyer that does, I don't know, something. Take one. All right, so Dust Bowl. This is a card that's been removed. I had to make room. This card would actually be Fury. I needed to put Fury in the deck, and I couldn't figure out where to slot it. So In this case, if my opponent had a non-basic land, what I could do is play Dust Bowl, put the City of Traders effect on the stack, then tap it and another land for mana or like the Mox, and sacrifice the city to the Dust Bowl to kill a land, and then allow the City of Traders sacrifice effect to resolve, which means that I wouldn't sacrifice anything without killing something first. That's the way that I would use a Dust Bowl with City of Traders. However, in this case, like I said, it's become Fury, and you'll see here it's not necessary for this game at all. Of course, we're going to get Karn out, and I reveal 2. I see Worn Power Stone and K Command. Pretty nice combination there. So we got a K Command sitting under Karn, basically. So yeah, I'll take the extra mana, which is what they gave me, and just play it. Play a Shatter Skull Smashing. I do want to get back to playing lands. I'm good. I've ramped enough with City of Traders. City of Dark Rituals, basically. We'll go ahead and chomp on that with the Abyss. I mean, there's just this is a hopeless game. I'm running through it, but yeah, we'll just ping off his guy. He's trying to, I'm not sure what my opponent's trying to accomplish. Yeah, and then finally my opponent realizes, like, this is the most hostile board I can, like, reasonably imagine to creatures. This is just absolutely hopeless. Opponent has 1 card in hand, and I'm going to be drawing like a madman. Obviously, the real reason for, all the plays was just to set up for the giant death cloud. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3. Sorry, black, black, black. So that's 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Play a land. 6. So what's going to happen this turn, or what did happen, sometimes the replay cuts off, is I play a land, tap Death Cloud for 6. My opponent has no cards in hand, only has this weird Saga in play, no permanence in play. I discard my entire hand, but I'm left with Chrome Mox, Soul Ring, the Abyss, Goblin Bombardment, Worn Power Stone, Karn, who I then activate to make a creature and start beating my opponent down, a creature that swims through the Abyss, and Tevesh Szat, who I then activate to spit out some guys, or I don't even know if I've even played Rograkh this turn. I could play him and then just draw 3 cards right after mind twisting my own hand away. So a pretty gross game, but obviously against a deck like that, it's not. It's a casual player who wanted to see what cEDH was all about. Totally fine, but we're not gonna attaboy ourselves too hard over that. Anyway, Krenko 10 Street Kingpin. So my opponent, Oi Bananayo? I'm not sure. Banana Oil. Banana Oil. Is playing Krenko 10 Street Kingpin. So whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 on it, create a number of goblins. So this is a Goblin Swarm type build. Obviously a deck that's a total dog to Tevesh Szat, because we just run so many sweepers in the deck. But you never know. Things can get out of hand pretty quick with goblins at times. Commander's Plate's certainly going to help. Well, normally it would. In this case, it is dead when I need it to be. Alright, so opponent does have an Ancient Tomb, which means Krenko came down a little bit sooner than I was anticipating here. So I'm going to go ahead and get my Saga down now. Run out my Signet, and then because I have extra artifact removal, I don't need to hold this. Let's just protect ourselves, because if my opponent were to equip this thing, it would become 4 power, and then it would produce 4 goblins, and also it would have protection from my Fire Covenant. It's just all around bad news, so we'll go ahead and just kill that thing right now before that happens. I'm going to play Sigil of Valor. So when it attacks zone, it gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control, and this makes creatures, so that's a pretty cool little combo. Opponent runs out Pyretic Ritual, equips, plays Throne of the God Pharaoh. It domes me at the end of turn for every tapped creature my opponent controls. This is pretty ambitious to assume that you're going to just, like, your Krenko is just going to go unmolested, and you're going to take advantage of. Basically, this is like all your creatures get +1 power is the equivalent. Not great. This is an Orcish Aura Flame. But hey, I take 1 damage there. Alright, so we'll just Saga up, play a land here, and pass for the turn. I've got Fire Covenant ready to go. I just wanted to wait, because if my opponent had, say, an equipment that they slammed down and tried to equip, then I could hurt their mana even further by with the Covenant here. But yeah, we'll just go ahead and do this. And my opponent can replay his commander potentially with the land here, but it still buys me a ton of time. when it does in fact have a land and plays their commander again, I believe. Yeah. And time is something that you don't want to give this deck. Alright, so we'll go ahead and draw, and then I'm just going to make a blocker. It's just a reason for my opponent potentially not to attack. Remember that even though it's a 2-2, he can put the sigil on, make his guy a 2-3, but this is about to be a 3-3. So we'll go ahead and choose Soul Ring here as the card of choice. I'm being a little bit maybe cautious here. I could play like City of Traders and then just slam Tevesh Szat, but I decided to wait just a little bit longer, and the reason I'm doing that is because I have Rack and Ruin, 2 targets, and I want to see if I can get my opponent to invest a little mana, possibly even swing in and then just trick them by blowing their thing away and blocking their commander. So for my opponent's turn, Gauntlet of Might. That's awesome. I haven't seen Gauntlet of Might in ages. Whenever a mountain's tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional red. Red creatures get +1/+1. Super cool card. Interestingly, pumps up Rograkh and makes my mountain tap for 2. Opponent then goes ahead and equips her sigil. Now the creature is just a bit big. Remember, it's going to become a 3/4 when it attacks. And I'm like, I don't want my opponent to have 3 creatures, so I'm going to just leave him with the useless throne over there and kill the 2 things that are pumping his commander, which of course discourages my opponent from attacking. And so now on my turn, I'll just play Tevesh Szat and go ahead and Ancestral myself, or Tidings myself, basically. Opponent has 1 card in hand, so that would be nice to take away from them. But I think about it, and I think I decide that rather than just twist 1 card out of their hand, this hurts me if it's a Wheel of Fortune, but outside of that, I'm going to sit on a Braid, and I'm going to just do that because whatever they have in hand, so far it's shown to be unlikely to be a major threat, but they could top deck a threat. And if I take the card out of their hand and then they top deck, like, say, Sword of Fire and Ice or something, and then they slam it and equip it, I feel pretty dumb for using my Braid mana, and so it wasn't worth taking that risk here. Besides, maybe the card they draw is like one of those cards that you tend to hold. And then in that case, they might have had 2 cards in hand at the end of their turn. I could get more value with the twist. Anyway, so it's a Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear, I don't know, makes a creature bigger and does a few things that just don't matter in most games of Magic. So I'm just going to go ahead and kill his Shadow Spear here. I'll let him keep the Krenko. Now my permanents don't have hexproof or something. My opponent, in frustration, has no cards in hand, so just swings in. This is desperation mode here, so go ahead and kill that. I could have let him attack first. He would have had 1 more goblin, but alright, there's Karn. That's going to shut off all the artifact shenanigans that my opponent's up to now and in perpetuity, right? Go ahead and just make some thralls. And the reason I'm not worried about drawing cards is, of course, I have Naz. Add Naz here. Opponent plays a Soul Ring that doesn't do anything. Does not attack with their 1/1s, I don't believe. And yeah. We just get to Nauseam. So 5 mana, instant draw. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And as soon as I hit Deathcloud, I accidentally clicked 1 more time. I realized, I'm done. Deathcloud is good enough. Tutor actually would have been good enough. But I didn't want just Tutor. I wanted Tutor plus something I didn't want just 1 action card. I wanted 2, and I definitely found one. So I just stopped at 22 life, and this deck does not need to ad nauseum for 1,000,000, right? I just Brain Geysered myself for, what was that, 8, 9 cards at the end of my opponent's turn. Barely took any damage at all. I'll take it. So Jessica's Will there. Will set cards aside for me in the future, but for now I have things to do. So go ahead and just get some mana sources down, and Demonic Tutor. I decided to get another Karn out. Actually a lot greedy, honestly. This probably is not playing this correctly, and I'll tell you the reason why, and it's because my opponent right here could top deck Wheel of Fortune. So this is extremely greedy and foolish, but I do give my opponent 1 more turn to play Magic, when I should have just broke their back immediately. And my opponent does not top deck Wheel of Fortune. So they do, however, get this thing, which allows them to recruit into a Goblin King. Because I have a mountain, actually he can give his goblins Goblin Walk, and now with his 2 tokens can attack and kill the Karn that just made a 5/5. Really disappointing. Disappointed with myself for the poor play there, but hey, we'll go ahead and draw some extra cards here, and swing in for some damage, and then just blow the world up. Don't know why it took this long to do it, really. Alright, so this is what a lot of games, if your opponent refuses to concede, of course, this is how the games look in a few turns when they don't. They look like this. And yeah, nice soul ring. Alright, so I'll just ultimate Tevesh Szat. If you get Tevesh to precisely 10-10, when you ultimate him, he'll kill himself as part of the cost, and then you put him in your command zone, and then as part of the resolution, he puts all commanders in play, which means himself, as well as, of course, your opponent's commander. You see I got it there. And your Rograkh, which doesn't increase the cost of either one of these. And then you immediately eat your Rograkh, draw 3 cards, and then you're left with your opponent's commander, no matter where it's hiding. So that's the situation here. And, of course, I'm just going to continue to get advantage. And finally, my opponent realizes, like, hey, I'm at 8 life. I have 1 card in hand and a soul ring that doesn't work. Opponent has control of my commander and is about to hit me for 4. I don't think there's a card you can top deck that gets you out of this situation. I'm going to hit him for 4 there, hit him for 2 here, and, you know, whatever. All right. Opponent does decide to jump into another game with me, though, so we'll run through that one. I'm going to take a drink here. I realize not the most, like, no disrespect, but not necessarily the most interesting opposition in that game. Not because of my opponent, but just the deck choice. And but it is interesting to see how this deck works, because I don't want to just show you, you know, first turn kills all the time. Like, you want to actually see how the deck plays out in a real game, right? If your opponent doesn't concede. So here you can see Dust Bowl would have been Fury. Not that it's necessarily an improvement in this opening hand, but this hand is good enough to keep, and I've got some disruption against a 3-color deck. That seems acceptable. So we'll go ahead and, plus I'm going first, so I have, you know, tempo here on my side as well. So we'll go this route. Opponent does have a Chrome Mox. You can see I didn't keep, like, this is a very fair hand, and my opponent has essentially an unfair hand. It is what it is, though, but it's just one of those things, like I was saying, you gotta have to be careful a little bit about the fact that this really is a fast format. All right, so I've got Wasteland Strip Mine, I've got Expedition mapped down. Opponent's gonna possibly play their commander here. Hopefully that's it, because it's not as big of a deal. It's a bit annoying. So when this is untapped, permanents come into play untapped. When this is tapped, permanents come into play tapped. And so it means that if he attacks, all my permanents will come into play tapped, and then he untaps, all his will come into play untapped, including things like the Karus, the bounce lands, and anything that normally says it comes into play untapped, rather tapped, will ignore it and be untapped on his side. So there's a lot of tempo involved in this commander. No card advantage, but definitely tempo. I'm, of course, going to go get a source of mana, Command Tower. I choose Command Tower over, say, Badlands. The reason is that my fetches can get Badlands, and so I want to maximize the quality of the targets that they can choose. Top deck Interacto Signet there is pretty good, so go ahead and Ritual here. And I'm just going to try to get a little more mana on the board while I can. So I'm going to run out this and even my Dark Confidant. So now I've got more mana, more card drawing, and I can disrupt my opponent's mana just a smidge here, so we'll go ahead and do that. And hopefully, and just like that, though, I was way behind on tempo, and all of a sudden we're completely even, right? Four mana sources and a creature, 4 mana sources and a creature, 4 cards in hand, 2 cards in hand, so I'm a bit behind, but I'm in a much stronger position than I was. Opponent inexplicably enchants their forest. I guess they needed the mana, and then Ewit's an Overgrown Tomb and attacks. So Dust Bowl, if I play it, will come into play tap, but we'll see. Now, I said I had 2 cards in hand, but actually I had 4 if the Dark Confidant lived, and so here we are. And this deck's just so good at doing this. It's so good at just punishing mana sources. So we'll go ahead and Strip Mine away a Forest and a Utopia Sprawl. Opponent's down 2 mana. Go ahead and play a tapped City of Traders and Rack and Ruin away 2 more mana sources, including the imprinted Chrome Mox, which took away a Cyclonic Rift. And my opponent went from being even on mana sources to me to being 1 to my 5, way behind. Although, we do know that the opponent has a card in hand. Now, I decided to play Rograkh here. I have no actual use for it, and generally you want to hide it for that reason, except there's some world where I may want to block at some point, and because he's going to come into play tapped, I want him to just get into play now in case down the road I need to block with him, in case I need to chump. Alright, so opponent does recover. Got the land that they picked up, plus an extra mana source, and can hit me for some more damage. But I draw K command into Thoughtseize, so just more brutalizing stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is Thoughtseize. I see Necropotence, Penman's Aura. Opponent can definitely keep Penman's Aura. I was going to take the last card out of their hand with K command, kill this and take the card out of their hand, but given that it's Penman's Aura and a combo card with no combo pieces and very hard to cast, much better play for me will be actually to turn this Arkelos into an artifact, and then I'm going to kill the annoying thing and the Eternal Witness. So 2 damage to the Witness, destroy target artifact on the creature, and now I can actually get in there, and my opponent has no board presence whatsoever. They have 3 mana and a Penman's Aura and nothing. Top deck, my opponent top decks a Soul Ring, so they're right back to being able to play their commander in short order. You know, this deck's just kind of rude. Notice I haven't even played my commander, right? This is just deck doing deck things, right? So we'll go ahead and Yawgmoth's Will, tap for some mana, Dark Ritual, play a Strip Mine. I'm going to lose a land to do it. That is okay. And I'm going to Rack and Ruin, Soul Ring, and Talisman away again. And Thoughtseize away the last card in my opponent's hand, leaving them with just 2 lands there. And then actually from this position there's very little my opponent can do. The only card they can top deck, the only 2 cards they can draw in this position are that I would care about are Sylvan Library and Dark Confidant. So that's it. So from this position I could Strip Mine my opponent, not while the will is running, but during their upkeep, because I don't want to exile the Strip Mine. I want to use it for Cavern of Souls later. But actually when I was thinking about it, I was like, I will take the risk on those 2 cards and go ahead and just actually cast Expedition Map, because Expedition Map will get me Urza's Saga, which would allow me to apply massive pressure to my opponent, and also Saga gets Skull Clamp, which would allow me to draw way more cards. Like if you think the commander's good, wait till you +2 it and spit out 2 1/1s that you, or 0/1s that you then clamp and draw 4 cards off of. Right, it's just even crazier as long as you have the mana to do it. So at any rate, that was the game plan here. Just cast the map and pass. And my opponent has no permanents, just about no cards. Well, anyway, no chance. They concede, and we move on to the next game against Lion Valentine. They should have drawn, just in case they drew a Sylvan Library, but if I were them. But possible they were just assuming I was going to strip and take even that way back into the game away from them. And maybe I should have, honestly. But either way, here we are playing against Aurelia, another non-serious commander. So this is just more of an exercise in how does the deck work. But the deck works fine, so very well, actually. When you have the problem with commander, as I've said many times these days, is unfortunately the problem with commander is the commanders. So imagine if we just take like Tevesh, Szat, and Rograkh out of the picture, take Aurelia out of the picture, and now I have a hand that looks like this. Is this keepable? Well, it's keepable, but what does it do, right? I have to top deck a Tutor, a Necro, something, or I'm just going to like draw some cards, run out of gas, and then die. Right? It does nothing. The problem with commander is the commander, because what this deck does now is it just draws a million cards off of Tevesh Szat, right? And God, to add insult to injury, I top deck Soul Ring, so yeah, pretty gross. So I actually have 2, 3, 4, 5. And right back to what I said before, it's a first turn kill deck. So here we are on Ancestral, and this is my opening hand, right? Like this is just absurd. Just being able to Ancestral and put a 5 casting cost thing that my opponent has to deal with into play like that is just completely absurd. If it wasn't for this, I would have had a mana flood with just nothing. Like none of this hand does anything, right? It doesn't draw cards. It doesn't. It gives me no advantage whatsoever. It stalls for time. But now all I have to do is stall for time. I'm going to play Stoneforge Mystic. Obviously this game is over, but we'll go ahead and just see how it ends. Opponent runs out, grabs a Sword of Feast and Famine. It's a good choice. Alright, so from here I'm just going to play my Mana Vault. Play my, I'm going to float some mana here because I don't know how I'm going to spend it yet. And I'm also very careful, you'll notice, about playing lands before I draw extra cards, because I want to make sure that I manage my mana in the most optimal way possible, and that includes potential land drops, because Urza's Saga or Strip Mine both are much better plays than Basic Swamp. So I'm going to hope for one of those. Go ahead and draw some cards, or maybe just a Tab Sulphurous Mire sometimes. Here I drew Gilded Lotus, and I've got mana floating from the workshop, so we'll go ahead and run that into the Lotus. And then with the Lotus, I'm going to go ahead and Thoughtseize my opponent. I see Return to Dust. Wow, really glad to take that. Blazing Sunset, which is just some equipment, doesn't matter, and a creature that is DOA. So none of this matters, but the Return to Dust, that's a real nice one to get. So we'll go ahead and just take that out of there. Finally, I'm going to play a land. I play the come into play Tap Sulphurous Mire, and I'll just K-command my opponent, make him discard an additional card here. This is just stalling for time, mainly because I know what's in my opponent's hand, right? So that shows up twice. Opponent discards one of these cards, and then possibly their best play might be Akiri. So they would probably keep their Mountain and Akiri, and if they're smart, they would discard Blazing, whatever that is, Sunshine or whatever. So on their turn, they play land, they play Akiri, and then we just rollick it right out of the board. And then with Goblin Bombardment, we can get Goblin Bombardment running with Tevesh Szat if we want to. And there's pretty much no hope of them ever getting a creature to stick ever again. And of course, if we're not busy, like if we don't need to puke out guys for bombardment, we'll just eat them and turn them into card drawing. So, all right, that's it. But once again, turn one kill. We'll go on to Sean BZ. It's just a normal day in Commander these days. And yeah, opening hand against Arcanist. Unfortunately, the impotent in this particular scenario, because once again, this deck quite happy to face a blue deck. Opponent does get to go first though, and has nothing too exciting. Unfortunately, you cannot Lotus and use the Lotus mana like a Black Lotus to Cabal Ritual into your commander, even though you're going to be playing the commander. You need 2 mana off the ritual to do it, so I'll just pass here. And opponent plays Arcane Signet on turn 2. Alright, so now we don't need to use the ritual here, so we'll go ahead and just wait. I use the fetch land here and I get the Vista, and the reason that I use the fetch land here is that I want to use it before I actually draw all of my fetchable targets. So, alright, we'll go ahead and play the old commander here, and I actually have too many cards in hand. So I could draw 3 and then discard, or I could just make some thralls, and then if my opponent like bounces Tevesh Szat, that's fine. I can Jessica's Will it back out shortly, or Cabal Ritual it back down. Opponent plays Dreamscape Artist. I let this thing live, which ends up being a bit of a mistake, but yeah, I try calling the weak. It's just like just more and more gross. So I'm going to go ahead and calling into Jessica's Will, I think. Oh, Rograkh. Yeah, Jessica's Will. Alright. So I play Rograkh first before I will, just in case my opponent did have a bounce spell. They should have played it in response, but if they don't play it in response, I wanted to make sure that I got both effects. Opponent has 4 cards in hand, so I have 6 mana floating. I get a Whispers of Emrakul. This is a card that's been cut. This would be Collective Brutality, and it would be much better here. In this case, it'll make my opponent discard 2 cards at random, but it'd be a lot better if I could do a precision discard and also take out their Dreamscape Artist here, which is, it became Collective Brutality. So we'll go ahead and just, play the Worn Power Stone, play the Whispers. I get an Island and a Sculpting Steel. Go ahead and play Duretti, Spaghetti, and make a Defender, and then while I'm at it, let's Ancestral. Find myself a Mox, but there's actually no reason to pitch the Mox right now. All out of mana for the turns, all I got for this turn, so I should actually Rollick this away. This lets him discard a card, sack a land, and Harrow. Basically, sacrifice land, put 2 basic lands into play, untapped. And so, after it resolves, it effectively has an activation cost of a single blue. But more importantly, it lets them trade useless cards in their hand for the mana to play something like Arcanist Omnipotent. I'm holding Deadly Relic for that card, and I'm intending to kill like the construct. Sorry, use the construct to kill the Signet here next turn. I should have just nuked this thing right now though, because I can always change gears and have the ready kill Arcanist. And letting my opponent get extra mana just means that it's more frustrating down the road when I want to Death Cloud, which I'm holding a Wishclaw Talisman, I'm holding a Demonic Tutor effect, which means that I can Death Cloud very soon. So I should have been playing like that. Plus it allows, like I said, my opponent to turn useless cards into useful cards, mana, and then later cast priced cards. Opponent Mystic Sanctuary is this card that functions as a land. It's the Seagate Restoration. It's clever. It's clever. I didn't really think about Mystic Sanctuary with the man lands, or with the spell lands. How Mystic Sanctuary could actually get you a land drop. That's something I need to stick in the back of my mind for future deck design. I think that's really interesting. If blue ever becomes viable in Commander again, but there's a question about whether or not that's going to be true. I'm going to go ahead and play Rograkh here so that I can draw 3 cards for 0. Basically tidings again. And, okay, yeah, so opponent has 1 card in hand. I'm going to ready that away. Play my Mox. Get some more mana into play. Get some more artifact into play. Get more Demonic Tutor into play. Play a land here. And do I allow him to keep this creature? I really do. I allow my opponent to keep the creature. Again, I'm thinking I'm going to kill Arcanist. Oh, okay, I see. So the reason I let my opponent keep it is because I wanted to use Relic during their upkeep and have them discard. I knew they were holding a land, but that land is modal. It could be a spell. So basically, if they use this in response, they're trading a little bit of tempo and a land in their hand for land in the board, and that doesn't matter too much. So I decided to just kind of do that. And my opponent, goes along with it. That's fine with me. Okay, so now they've got top deck, and they're down to 7 lands with nothing. A frequent occurrence in this deck. So we'll go ahead and get the come into play tapped land here. Tevesh Szat into a few cards, finding a Yawgmoth's Will. We get wills all over the place here. And then I miscount here, I think. So I get my Thran Dynamo going, run out my will. Can't remember if I miscount or not. Start generating lots and lots and lots of mana. Activate Wishclaw, play a Jeweled Lotus from the graveyard. And, no, I guess I counted correctly. 7. And X is 7. And boom, 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 boom. So my opponent now has a Wishclaw Talisman, and before they finished sacrificing all 7 of their lands, they sacked 4 of them and then conceded like halfway through. But yeah, obviously the other 3 lands would have been sacrificed here if they hadn't conceded right at that exact second. Leaving them with just a Wishclaw Talisman, there's no way to wish yourself out of a win, especially when I'm going to get a tutor back. And very shortly, Tevesh Szat's going to grab Arcanist and make him work for me. I can just plus up the ready and make a token. I could use Duretti to trade the Jeweled Lotus for the Wishclaw. I could eat the token if I do the token, if I go the token route, and then just draw extra cards and find artifact removal. I mean, however you want to slice it, it's game over at that point. So, Lokang, Death Cloud. The initials are DC. The opponent does often disconnect after they're clouded sufficiently hard. It's funny how often that happens. It is effectively the coup de grace in this deck for any time the opponent doesn't just give up. And we're back to playing turn 1 Magic again. Yay! So fun. I mean, frankly, it is fun. It feels good. It's the kind of fun that's like, this kind of fun in Magic is the kind of fun that's a little bit like, I don't know, it's like doing drugs in real life. It feels really good and it's super exciting, but it does become addicting. You want to do it all the time. You're sad when your opening hand isn't like 5 mana or whatever. But at the same time, it's not really good for the health of the game, right? Like, is this really what the game should be about? Like, me drawing an opening hand that looks like this, and then my opponent trying to figure out what the heck they should be doing about it. I don't think so, but maybe you do. I mean, definitely open to it. But in the meantime, we can run this out so many different ways we can play it. But I decided that the way to do it is we'll just do this. We'll just go old school on them. And mind twist my opponent's entire hand, and their next card is a 3-drop. And then next turn we'll play Shadow Skull Smashing Dark Confidant, use the mana to get the Worn Power Stone, and then just run out the commander and win the game. But of course, we've already won the game, so opponent concedes and dies. Thank you for playing. Alright, so we'll move back. This is one of the best Jeweled Lotus decks in the format. It's one of the best Mind Twist decks in the format. It's one of the best Yawgmoth's Will decks in the format. Not the best, because a pure Storm deck would be better, but the fact that it's so good at so many degenerate things. This deck is, the problem with this deck is that that's exactly it. It's not so much that it's super good at what it does, but it's like super good at what it does, and what it does is degeneracy, right? So it's super good at that. Makes it kind of awful experience, I would imagine, but I don't know. I'm on the play side now. I have joined the dark side, and I'm enjoying it for now. So another hand with just more dumb mana ramp early on in the game. The ritual effects are even worse for the game, in my view, than the rituals and lotuses are worse for the game than moxes and soul rings, because soul rings can be interacted with and produce less mana than rituals, which generally speaking cannot be. I mean, you have to be playing blue, cannot be interacted with, and it's not a matter of the fact that you generate more mana over time with a card like Soul Ring. It's a matter of generating enough mana to just win the game now, and who cares? There is no overtime because game's already over. So anyway, pretty nasty start here. A lot of different ways it could go with this, but we'll see. We'll see how we sequence it. So I've stalled long enough to hopefully give you time to decide how to sequence this if this is your hand. And of course my opponent could duress here, but instead plays Ragavan. Turn 1 Ragavan is a scary start against anybody, but luckily I've got the hand that can address that, so we'll go ahead and ritual here. I've got 3 mana. I'm going to go ahead and spend one of them to play a drum, and now I'm going to sneak out Rograkh and then tap him for mana. Or, sorry, tap 2 mana, rather, and play Liquid Metal Torque, and then tap him for mana. And play Worn Power Stone. So I decide that my opponent can have 1 card and 1 token here. By the way, this would have been Fury, but I didn't have a red card to go with it, so it wouldn't have made a difference here. But in the new version. Yeah, so I decided I'm going to rather than create a blocker or play first turn Tevesh Szat, I'm going to rather just puke out a ton of mana, give my opponent 1 chance to hit me, and get in this game. And hopefully they don't hit anything too sexy on my side. For example, they might get a token here and then hit Rack and Ruin, and then just blow up 2 of my mana sources and probably kill me. I think in hindsight this was incorrect. I was actually not expecting myself to play it out this way. I think what I should have done is generated a ton of mana, got out the opal and the drum and everything, and then just played Tevesh Szat, made the blockers, and then from there chump blocked, and then moved on to Ancestral Recalling, and then used the mana that I drew off the Ancestral effects, or if I sack Rograkh, the Tidings effects, to then produce more mana and do it safely without getting hit by Ragavan. This let my opponent have a chance to get in the game because my cards are so good at dealing with my starts. So I'm my own worst enemy against a commander like that. But turns out to be fine. So next game here is against LDude210. By the way, I think I mentioned this here. Colossum, and there was a few others. Dots. Quite a few of the hardcore EDH players give this deck much more trouble than what you're seeing here. Don't get me wrong. This deck can lose. It's just that normally what losing looks like is exactly what winning looks like, except it's on the other side of the board. It looks like you died on turn 1. Because you basically did. Alright, because your engine is in the sideboard and always waiting for you, just like this. Alright, so now we're playing against Tymna and Crom. Tymna and Crom, classic mortal enemies. A combination, once again, partners, completely busted, super unfair, super unfun, honestly. Just gross because it's unfair and degenerate. However, not as gross as this. Weirdly enough, Tymna only requires 3. Crom is a secondary thing. You can get your card drawing engine going for 3 mana. This one requires 5, but 4 colorless and a black is so much easier than black, white, and 1, strangely enough, but in this format it really is. More importantly, though, it's just much more degenerate of an effect, like much more insane, like game-altering of an effect, because Tevesh Szat can just take all of the commanders and protect itself while doing it, or just start pumping cards into your hand so fast that you protect him. So anyway, we'll see how it plays out, but I would, my opponent has to mulligan too, which certainly isn't helping things. But I generally, as I said, I don't believe this deck's ever lost to a deck that has runs a blue commander. I'm not sure how it would, other than just kind of some crazy aberration. But I'm going to go ahead and just Imperial Seal on turn 1 and just kind of take it easy. And then play Rograkh because of Deadly Relic, because of the fact that I want to be able to exile. If my opponent plays like... there's some things that they could play for like Esper Sentinel and stuff like that. I will give my opponent a card in order to make sure that I don't give them like 5 cards next turn or whatever. This does leave them open to being removed. My opponent leads off with Badlands, does not duress my hand or anything, which wouldn't have stopped the next turn, but would have certainly helped my opponent. Alright, so Ancient Tomb, Jeweled Lotus. We'll go ahead and just run out Tevesh Szat. I'm not quite sure what happens here, but I plus up, so I think, yeah, my opponent bolts in response, so it goes to the sideboard. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then I just plus up and just, that's fine. We'll just put 2 little Night's Whispers into play or whatever. Honestly, these are Ancestral Recalls, so Ancestral Recall, you go down a card to draw 3. This is down no cards to draw 2. It's the same card advantage as Ancestral, so I put 2 Ancestral Recalls into play. And this, when you sack him, is Tidings. It's 1 card to draw 4 or 0 cards to draw 3. So that's why Tidings is 1 card to draw 4. So that's why I've been calling them what I've been calling them anyway. Tevesh Szat here, obviously we'll just Ancestral Recall and then decide what we want to do with our hand. And yeah, we'll go ahead and just take it slow here. That's fine. I can just run this card out. Call it good. I've got Deadly Relic ready to go in case I need to. And now at this point, kind of bad news for my opponent because Tymna is not... so typically when they're playing Tymna and Crom, they're actually playing combo. But a lot of times their combo decks buttressed, it's supplemented by the cards that they gain off of their commanders and the fact that they can pressure you really hard with their commanders. But at this point, if my opponent like rituals out Crom, I can just Relic it. If they try and get a Tymna in play, I just Goblin Bombardment. So it's going to be pretty hard for my opponent to really do much. Even if they did manage to Crom into Tevesh Szat, it doesn't kill it. I'm going to instead change the Vapors it, so, I'll pick it back up. I'm not going to bounce that. Opponent's down to 4 cards in hand, though. And the nice thing here is even if my opponent's follow-up was somehow Tymna, all I have to do is play Rograkh, and then I can just shoot it off the board if I want to. Alright, but, I mean, if my opponent wants to run out a counterspell here, Tevesh Szat only costs 5 now, so if they run out a counterspell, I'll play it. I'm going to go to the command zone, and then next turn I can just ritual it out and play it on 7, so we'll go for it again. And no counter. I was quite surprised to see no counter forthcoming. I don't have a full hand yet, but I am going to plus it up, just because if I drew 2 cards there, the thing is, I drew Necro and I have Ritual. I don't need the cards right now as much as I need the pressure that Tevesh Szat's putting on my opponent to address it before I steal both of their commanders. So I actually can kind of chill out on the card draw and just also charge up my Goblin Bombardment. Which means that, like, let's say my opponent were to go, like, land Jace, I can just shoot the Jace to death. Alright. And a Mind Twist to go with, so, okay. So I am going to go ahead and draw some cards here just to get... I didn't hit a Mana Source, so I want to get an extra land. So I don't find one. I find Mox Opal, which usually is Mana Source, but... And Mox Diamond, which usually produces something. But in this specific instance, of course, I'm not getting anything. So I'm going to try a Ritual and see if that resolves. If it does, then I can be a little aggressive and run out Necro. What I was expecting was that my opponent would counterspell here, and if my opponent counterspelled here, then they would have 4 cards in hand, and then I could Mind Twist my opponent for 3, leaving him with just a singular card. And then from there, they're going to do whatever play they're going to make, but I'm going to follow up with a will and then strip all the cards out of their hand. Of course, it didn't happen here, so I'm still going to make that play, but I'm going to make it under the assumption there's no counterspell forthcoming. And yeah, get Path to Exile, Esper Sentinel, Pact to Negation. Not playable at the moment, and this deck does not, unlike you know, these 4-color decks like Brea and stuff, where you have to kind of sit on cards that you can't play until you get your mana. This deck doesn't typically run into that problem, so you just don't have that kind of time. You don't have the luxury. Justica's Will looks weak here, but consider it draws 3 cards regardless of the fact that I may not be getting any mana back. So it's still quite potent. Although, you know, once you have the potency of Necro, you don't necessarily need that sort of effect. Alright, so I'm going to him my opponent here. They've got 3 cards in hand. They might have drawn a counter. Let's go ahead and sort of massage the way, I guess. Like, opponent discards Thassa's Oracle LED. So I could have actually, it's funny because I'm feeling like I'm winning. If my opponent had Thassa's Oracle in hand there, and one of the other cards was just that Demonic Consultation, they have exactly blue, blue, black, and just could have won the game on the spot, which is scary. Alright, digging for more mana. I do find some, and disruption, so we'll go ahead and play the Graven Cairns. And I'm going to Inquisition my opponent. I can't take Ad Nauseam out of their hand, unfortunately, but I can Demonic Tutor into Soul Ring and grab a couple of cards. And pretty much my opponent has one turn here to do something useful, or they're going to die. And they draw and they have no play, and then they lose. I think I probably could have played this a little better, but you know, it worked out. It worked out fine, so we'll just move on to the next game. Obviously, El Dude 210 was having problems with getting white, but again, you know, you're playing 4 colors. It is the risk. I've had that happen plenty of times, as you've seen on the channel. All right, we're running against Lombo Fam. Also, when you're 4 colors like Brea, where you're designed to, your control decks, you're designed to generate your resources, it's one thing. But when you're 4 colors as a combo deck that's designed to go off, you have less cards like Tithe and less room for mana fixing. You're not necessarily running some of the other cards that allow you to, you know, Trinket Mage and Fabricate and cards like that allow you to go get alternate sources of the color of mana that you're missing. So you're a little less consistent, but a little bit more lethal. And being inconsistent against a disruption deck is a problem, right? All right, so opponent here, Lombo Fam, mono green deck. As I said, it's just a turn 1 kill format, and this hand kind of just goes back to more of that nonsense. So we're going to go ahead and just imprint the tutor. I don't need to tutor, I can Ancestral. So, and I'm going ahead and just run out a Mana Vault Karn and just start drawing away. I guess I could have put pressure on my opponent first here by creating a threat. But, you know, my hand's pretty low, so I want to refill a bit. So, opponent's choices are Badlands and Lotus. Opponent decides to give me Badlands. I think I would have gave the Lotus to, you know, because I'm a long way off from playing the Lotus, but, you know, hey, I'll take a Badlands. That's great. Alright, so take a little damage there. The Abyss against mono greens, just gross. Alright, once again, what do I get? Opponent gives me land or land, so they choose land. So there's a Verdant Catacombs in the sideboard. I don't think it's going to come up this game. Alright, so a little bit of a slow start, right? I mean, I get turn 1 Karn, but drawing another land here. I'm going to just start making... I don't need, like, obviously if it's spell, that's great, but if it's land, anything, I'm just going to keep getting land. So for the next few turns, I've got tons of land, so I don't need to dig anymore. So we'll just go ahead and play this development game instead. So now I've got access to double red or a second source of card drawing if I choose. For now, I'm just going to take the 2 red because I don't plus it up and deal 2 to my opponent and then exile like I don't know, strip mine or something from my deck that I plan to use. So I'm not going to do that. I don't care about 2 damage. I care about my deck performing the way it's supposed to perform. So opponent obviously struggling over there to keep up with this start. All right, I'm going to get some mana here. And in response, opponent Beast Within's the Chandra, which is really interesting. rather than the Karn. Also, strange that they allowed me to get the double red first, but yeah, I'll use the mana to grab the Lotus with Karn and play it, and then play a land and play my commander. Oh, wait a minute, I wasn't paying attention, so I actually had all of my targets, every single one. The basic mountain, the Badlands, the Blood Crypt, and the Sulphurous Mire was the only target left for the Wooded Foothills. If I'd have thought that through, I would have played like Wasteland here and then cast my commander, but instead, I actually have to take time off. So, silly enough, even though my opponent gave me a beast, I want to be mana efficient, so I'm just going to play Abyss. It's generally fine. It's green after all, so my opponent was playing like one of the slowest. Every turn was taking, I mean, look at the clock. Where is it? 49 minutes to 56 minutes. I was asking my opponent to please play faster. I don't know if it was their connection or what, but I just couldn't deal with it. So after the game, I did block them. Not because I felt like anything was wrong with this opponent necessarily, but I just, if the games are going to be like this, I couldn't deal with it. I don't want to ever have to deal with it again. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play Tevesh, Szat, Rograkh, and let's go ahead and Tidings rather, and produce another big guy and smash in for some more damage. Basically, this is just like old school, the Abyss while I kill you with artifact creatures. Alright. So, go ahead and plus up Karn here. This time, there is, like I said, another fetch land in the sideboard. Opponent gives me Arid Mesa. So there's another fetch land and a Soul Ring is what we got in the Karn zone. Alright, I'm going to play Rograkh and Tidings again. Him, my opponent, play a Liquid Metal Torque, play a Duretti, Spaghetti, go ahead and tap for some mana, play a Crucible Worlds, sack, kill the blocker, even though I could have waited for the Abyss to do it, but I just want to smash in and get more damage done, and end this game as fast as possible, because it was frankly agonizing to play. Alright, drawing a bunch of cards, making a bunch of guys, and turning my commander into a 0/1 artifact creature so that I can maximize my damage and, I guess, get in there and deal lethal. Alright, so we move on. Sorry, that wasn't the most interesting game. Alf the Doll is my next opponent. And, yes, Dissident Mage. So this should be a pretty significant battle, right? But I do have... when I can't go fast, I make them go slow, right? That's the rule in Commander, or just basically Magic in general. If you can't go fast, you make them go slow, so that they are at yours. You always want to make sure that it's kind of like running a foot race. You can either take off sprinting and then leave them in the dust, or they take off sprinting and you like throw a bolero and make them trip, and then you just jog past them at a nice, easy pace, right? So this is a combination of the two. I've got a little bit of acceleration and a lot of bolero action over here, so I'll keep this. This is acceptable. Opponent is going first, however, and runs out Badlands, Lotus Petal, and Tomb. This is scary. Do a Path Razor of Ulamog. So if they've got the ability to put it right into play, I'm in big trouble, right? If they've got Reanimate. Luckily, no Reanimate hits the board. I drew Urza's Saga. Normally, I might like to lead off with Urza's Saga, but not with the Disruption hand. You want to disrupt first. So I'll play the Command Tower, and I'll play Rograkh into Mox Amber. So the reason I'm doing this is that blue does have 4 spike effects, and I really want to stick to Thoughtseize, and if my opponent has a 4 spike, I would feel so stupid if I didn't make this play. So I'm just going to go this route, and we'll see what he's got. And my opponent has Persist, which is Reanimate for a non-legendary, and Squeeze, so we'll go ahead and take Persist, and then Scalding Tarners is Saga, so. Alright. Kind of a nasty start on my opponent's side. Opponent has an Urza's Saga, would have just won the game against quite a few decks right away. And then for some reason plays Squee, leaving a Scalding Tarn and a land in hand, or a card in hand, an unknown card. And I've got him, and Squee's not there to protect my opponent's hand. So I really don't like the Squeeze play here. But, you know, hey, opponent can pilot their deck however they like. So I'm going to go ahead and him away the last 2 cards, which end up being land. which is great, right? So they've got the Saga. I'm going to have to deal with whatever that produces, but it's bought me a lot of time against Kess. And if I don't get that time, Kess will come down and then allow my opponent to persist the Path Razor, and then from there, well, it's pretty bad. Unfortunately for me, top deck by my opponent is Mox Amber, which will allow them to make a robot here if they want, and only works because Squee is a legendary. So like maybe somehow my opponent was prescient and on that Squee turn there. And okay, well, it is what it is. Unfortunately I just draw Imperial Seal. So go ahead and play Saga here, and I'm going to run out to Seal. And I leave it to you to take a look at the deck if you would like to think about what it is that I might be getting. So my opponent's going to go ahead and play Urza Saga. And now I've got a big problem. Not only do they have a little bit of pressure for me, but they also have the ability here to go ahead and play Kess. And then, like I said, Kess Persist is going to be pretty gross, depending on what's in their deck. So opponent taps for mana and decides to make a construct rather than Kessing into Mox Imprinting Arcanist. So if they'd have floated the mana, they could have actually just played Kess here and not made a construct, but they're, I guess, planning to play top deck land and play Kess next turn is the plan, I assume. Alright, I'm not going to chump, I'll just use my life total. And I got Fire Covenant, rather. I was anticipating Kess coming down, and if Kess came down, this would allow me to clean up the token, clean up the Kess, but also it's important that I kill the Squee, because if I do, my opponent's sitting on only 3 mana, and if I kill the Squee, my opponent can't replay it. If they can't replay it, if they have no legendary, then the Mox Amber turns off. So this can basically disenchant the Mox for a little while also. So that's the thought here. I am under no circumstances going to be playing Urborg this game unless I absolutely have to, because my opponent's playing black, and I'm, pinching their mana, and I absolutely do not want to empower a potential Necropotence down the road. So I'm definitely going to sandbag that for as long as possible. But yeah, so Fire Covenant here, they made an extra robot, no problem. And the reason I chose Covenant over like Deluge, which would have saved me quite a bit of life, is that I want the Rograkh in play, because I'm planning on playing the Commander and then drawing extra cards. And so I don't want to kill my Commander. Also, I need it to live for the Mox Amber on my side of the board. And unfortunately, my opponent does top deck a land here, which means they get the Squee back, and their Mox Amber is right back to active status. Alright, so I'm going to float some mana here and go get Skull Clam, the even more powerful, ridiculous card here. So I'll play Tevesh Szat, make some tokens, and we are off to the races. Let's start drawing lots and lots and lots of cards. Alright, so I've played 2 commanders here. I can clamp Rograkh and then play it again for 2 mana, 3 total, and then make Jessica come into play with 3 counters on it if I want to. That's relevant because Kess unfortunately has 4 toughness. When it has 2 legendary creatures and an unknown card in hand, swings in here. I'm just going to let him hit Tevesh Szat. I'm not gonna block and block with a draw 2 or a draw 3. My opponent actually plays Snuff Out, which is an interesting card that could make its way into this deck theoretically if we're willing to accept the fact that we can't target black creatures. But it's very powerful in terms of tempo. You saw there, my opponent gets to make a Kess play the Snuff Out, and then because they have Kess, if I had another target, they could just Snuff Out again, which is pretty nasty. But I don't have another target, which is actually the only reason it's not in the deck. If it actually just said destroy target creature, it would already be in the deck. Anyway, from here, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I use my Mox. Well, we're gonna think it through, right? So I was looking at, how's the best way to do this, and I decided I'm going to use Tevesh Szat to draw the 2 cards here rather than clamping. And the reason I do that is because I wanted to see what my options are for killing Kess as to whether or not I needed to will, because I'm trying to save the will for as long as possible. Turns out I don't. All I need to do is play Rograkh, play Jessica with 3 counters on it, play Brutality, making that a 1-2, and then I can remove 2 counters and deal 2 to this, 2 to this, and 2 to my opponent. So that's what we'll do. And then from there, once again, I've turned off the Mox Amber, at least until Squee comes down, but now my opponent can't make a 4-drop this turn. Alright, opponent plays Squee again. It's funny how many times I've killed Squee without losing card advantage. because I have all these things that kill it and do something else as part of a mass removal. I've made my opponents discarded it and killed it, and it's still just not a big deal. And then, boop, Swords to Plowshares off the top. All right, go away, annoying thing. Now we'll just puke out, some guys and just draw a ton of cards. Get some free mana into play. Throw away the Urborg that I don't intend to play. Let's go ahead and get that card out of my opponent's hand and kill their mana. Excellent. Arcanist Omnipotent enters into exile. Take a Thought Scour out of my opponent's hand. Interesting. Go ahead and play an Expedition map and use it. I am going to lose my City of Traders here. That is acceptable. City of Traders can go away now. It's done its job. And we'll go ahead and kill a Volcanic there and pass for the turn. And at this point, my opponent has a Badlands and a useless Mox Amber, and says something like, "That's the perfect answer for literally anything deck." And I'm like, well, that is the intent of what the build does. It's literally, you don't have to answer everything, you don't have to counter everything, you just have to make it so they can't play it, they can't do it. Of course, if my opponent had drawn, like, say, a Reanimate effect or whatever on, specifically Reanimate, on the Pathrazor of Ulamog, it's not indestructible, so they'd reanimate it, it would jump into play, and then on my turn I'd just play the Abyss and we would drive on with the game. But, GG, and we move on to the next one against Swamp Serpent. And my opponent has, okay, opponent's playing a non-serious commander. I'm not sure why all these red-white commanders are showing up. And I have Ragavan. So yeah, this is very capable. I can go turn 2 Tevesh Szat, or I can go turn 1 Ragavan, and then turn 2 whatever, and turn 3 Tevesh Szat. So I think this is fine. In order to do the turn 1 Ragavan, though, I have to play the Shatter Skull. So I decide I'm going to go with that, because if I can get a token, this is an artifact. So next turn I can get a token, and then I'll have 1 mana plus the token's 2 plus the vault is 3 plus Mox Opal will actually be on, which means I have 4 mana next turn. Without sacking the token, I can feed the Swarm and Imperial Seal. So I figure this is a good start. This is if I connect, and then backup plan would be this. Opponent draws, has no solution, and just concedes. And so yeah, I drain the Swamp Serpent over here of their will to play. And I get another game against Colossum, the Eternal Foe. So for quite a few hours later, so this is the next day, this is today now, so that was all yesterday, and then today, after having made a few more tweaks and whatnot to the current version that I talked about in the beginning of this video, I've got these games now, and the deck is only had played a few games today, but I think these were very interesting. I will say this is one of the games that is worth, if you've stuck with it, this is one of the games that's very telling as to the power level of this deck, and you'll see why in just a second. Because power level isn't just the ability to do busted stuff early. Power level is the ability to recover from being behind or being disrupted as well. Overall power level of a deck does not just mean, it doesn't just mean the ability to do powerful things, but the ability to withstand powerful attacks as well. So this hand is borderline. If it had 1 more mana, it'd be pretty much a snap keep, but because you could run out like land, Landmox, Rograkh, Diabolic Intent, go get a Lotus, and then turn to Tevesh Szat, and then get in the game. My opponent is playing blue though, so I mean that is something to be aware of. But yeah, that hand just wasn't a keep. This hand is possibly disruptive, and if my opponent has, because remember this is a mountain. If my opponent has, I can kill like a 1 toughness guy. If they have like Rograkh, if they have the monkey, I can Vandal Blast away like a Soul Ring, and then by force away something else. And this hand is very, very, very fair. And if my opponent doesn't have the right targets, this hand is literally trash. So I'm not going to keep it. And there's a hand that is a proper Tevesh Szat hand. So we're going to keep this. And the hard part here is now I've got a mulligan too. So what do we throw away? So I decide to throw away Cabal Ritual because it doesn't look like, it looks like I've got plenty of mana. I'm not going to need fast mana. And I'm going to throw away 1 Swamp. Now, I thought about keeping the Ritual, and the reason for keeping the Ritual would have been something like I go turn 1 Mana Vault, turn 2 land, play my commander, and then on the next turn, if I don't draw lands for some reason, I could ritual out the opposition agent in response to like a fetch land or whatever. But most fetch lands are already gone by turn 2 or 3. So I decided I'm going to keep the opposition agent just in case. Like I can hit a fetch land or some kind of search effect, mystical tutor or whatever. But yeah, this is good. Maybe the opposition agent should have been the ritual or another land just for that just in case factor. But I decided not to. So I run first turn Mana Vault down and the Lotus. And instead of going turn 2 commander and then having a follow-up commander play, I decided to go for turn 1 commander. Let's just go for it. This is a turn 1 kill deck, right? And not this time. Not this time. When it removes a mystical tutor and Force of Wills me. And I am now left with a garbage hand, right? And a commander that costs 7. Against blue. I am in big trouble. And my opponent goes turn 1 Ragavan to add insult to injury, right? And I draw Imperial Seal. So my opponent goes turn 1 Ragavan, and I draw Imperial Seal, which means I can just Imperial Seal for, you know, hey, do you want a Soul Ring opponent? Here, why don't you take that, right? Well, there is a backup plan here, and it is a desperation plan. Everything has to work out, but it's worth a try. So I'm gonna try, which is throw out Rograkh to protect my top card, and then Imperial Seal, and then select the best card possible and hope. And my opponent does not have Lightning Bolt. Thank goodness. All right, Trump Block. And then what else are they going to follow up with, though? And my opponent actually, this was the extent of their play. Force of Will, protecting a Ragavan to terrorize me and potentially win the game, but no mana. So they miss a mana drop. This is fantastic. Because what that means is I can draw for the turn and play Soul Ring. And now my opponent once again misses a land drop, comes in, and I can cheat out sneak out opposition agent, chump. Okay, that threat is dealt with. Now keep in mind, I'm holding a Mana Vault, which means I now have 7 mana on the board to my opponent's 1, and guess who costs 7? Tevesh Szat. Alright, so opponent draws and has no play. And I do have a duress, but I'm not going to wait. Like, if my opponent if I duress and I see like a bunch of counters that cost 2 mana, then I'm screwed. So I'm going to go for it now. And we're just gonna hope that there's not a second Force of Negation or something like that. Doesn't hit. Go ahead and plus this out, and now we just gotta hope for no bounce spell. But I mean, bounce wouldn't be the worst thing because we just untap the vault and then get going again. And my opponent draws, and despite Force of Will, Ragavan is unable to win this game, and that is what I mean about the deck being resilient and not obviously. Something that you would expect to happen. Obviously, if my opponent hits some mana there and plays like a normal game of Magic, then I have no chance. But the fact that I even had a chance after I invested a Mana Vault and a Lotus on a mulligan, and then had to Imperial Seal against a Ragavan, still had a chance, all because having access to 2 commanders meant that I could protect my Imperial Seal, because, you know, having access to extra cards in the sideboard is completely unfair. All right, so we'll move on to the next game against Black Diamond 33. And my opponent is playing Lathril, Blade of the Elves, and I have a very nice start here, so we are going to keep. And I get to go first. Lots of ways you can sequence this. I decided that I can win off of Dark Confidant. I just want to make sure that the Confidant does his thing. So there's a lot of things I can do here. One of them, basically the sequence that I'm looking at is I'm going to Dark Ritual on turn 1. I'm going to Inquisition, figure out what's going on, and if I absolutely have to, then I'll follow it up with Collective Brutality. But if not, then I can Dark Confidant. And then, should I make, like, let's say, one of those plays, I still have Vampiric Tutor, which I can cast during my upkeep to get more if I need to. Alright, so I'm going to lead off exactly that way. I'm going to Dark Ritual. As I said, Dark Ritual effects really... They've been around Magic for a long time, and I've been playing against them for a long time, or playing with them, and I never have felt like they were... I felt like Dark Ritual and Lotus effects are kind of... I don't know. Well, you tell me. I mean, does this really feel... This is like I'm on turn 3 now, and my opponent hasn't even started the game yet. I mean, I'm only on turn 3 for a moment, but just being able to access 3 mana on a turn that I should only have one is just crazy, right? So we're going to Inquisition. Mona has a great hand here for Disruption. And they have a hand that'll shake off Disruption pretty well. Obviously, so what does their commander do? So whenever it deals damage to me, they create 1/1 tokens, and then it does some stuff that doesn't matter. But it means it slowly gets ahead. There's Menace. I can't really chump block. So there's an impulse here. Well, first of all, and then opponent has Autumn Veil. Spells can't be countered by blue or black, and creatures can't be a target. So opponent has some anti-black plays built into their deck. Probably as a side effect. They're probably meant to be anti-blue. But if you notice, they've got Rex Sage, and of course I want to tutor for like Soul Ring or something, right? But and the Lotus, which means they can play first turn Lathro. But they also have a card that allows them to gas back up. They're kind of short on mana with just the Mire and the Lotus. So I really, really do not want my opponent to get Sylvan Library into play. It's a much harder card for me to deal with. I can, but it's much harder than anything else that my opponent could be doing. To include their commander. If I have to, I can Vampiric Tutor in order to find a solution to their commander. But I cannot do that effectively against Sylvan. And by effectively, I mean before they get the benefit of having the Sylvan in play. So I just don't want to risk that. So I choose the Sylvan Library and I leave them with the rest. And I'm going to play Confidant. I know, I'm pretty confident that from here, I'm mostly okay once I deal with the Lathro. So we'll see what happens. And I'm gonna need the cards to rejuvenate my hand. I have Anger's Rampage, which allows me to force my opponent to sack a creature. So if I just flip any of the lands that come into play untapped and produce black or red, or a fetch land, then 100% I've dealt with their commanders. So we'll see what my first card is and then decide what we do if I Vampiric Tutor before seeing my second card. Alright. Boom. So as predicted, opponent loses these cards. They have one unknown and... Come on. There, down comes Lathro. Alright, so first for the Confidant, another removal card. So now the question is, do you Vampiric Tutor? Do you take the risk? I think because this card deals damage to me and creates some tokens, I can probably be okay even if that hits me. I won't, because I do Feed the Swarm. So Rampage is target player sacks a creature. So if this thing hits me and they get a 1/1, then I can't make my opponent sacrifice it. And then Feed the Swarm, though, would allow me to destroy target. Ironically, I took the Sylvan and Feed the Swarm kills it. So I really am thinking that I just want mana here. I can just... Mana into Rampage is great. Mana into Feed the Swarm is acceptable. Even if I get like a colorless land like Wasteland now. And if I don't get mana, I want to Vampiric Tutor and go get guaranteed mana drops. And possibly even... on the next turn, like I Brutality away Autumn's Veil, and then I Feed the Swarm away the Lathro, and then I'm fine. So with all that in mind, I decided to take a risk here. If not, there are a couple of cards I could have gotten. So if I really just didn't want to take the risk, then what I could have done was I could have tutored for, Deadly Rollick, and then just played Rograkh, and just exiled his commander. Alternately, there's another card I could have tutored for that didn't occur to me until I drew it, and it was this guy. Now, actually, it would have been better as the Dust Bowl that it was in the past, because I would just Dust Bowl Feed the Swarm here. But this is fine. So we'll just Fury out Rampage, deal 4 to that thing, and move on with the game. And attack for 2. Nice thing is it's red removal too, so even if they had Autumn's Veil, like if they had, say, Elvish Spirit Guide Autumn Veil, it wouldn't stop me right there, right? They do have one unknown card. Well, they top deck and do not find anything, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and tutor. I tutor for the wrong card here. I should have got Lotus. Because it doesn't deal damage to me. I got Calling the Weak. And also because I don't have to sacrifice my Rograkh. If I would have got Lotus here, I would have just played Rograkh, Lotus. I would have played Land, Lotus, Tevesh, Szat. But this is fine. It works out fine. I mean, in the end. But just FYSA, that was a misplay. I don't swing in here because if one of my opponent's cards is crop rotation and they crop rotate into the 1/1 green creature, Dryad Arbor, that's not great for them because they're using 2 cards to kill a Dark Confidant. But Dark Confidant represents like 3 or 4 or 5 of my cards. It's still a trade that they should make, and there's no reason for me to give them that trade potentially. So I just don't swing in. He wins the game with Dark Confidant wins the game without attacking. So now that I have instant speed removal, I can attack. But before I do, my opponent gives up. Obviously, right? Like it's over. I'm gonna draw 2 extra cards. So I'm now seeing 4 cards per turn, and my opponent's mana screwed. So yeah, we move on. But it was just an interesting little bit of a game there. All right, that was against Black Diamond 33, and now we have Arcane 3. A few more games, and we're done with the set. Hopefully, I know this is a long video, so hopefully entertaining though. And if you stuck around this long, surely you are entertained. Am I not entertained? All right, so we're playing against Rocco Cabretti Caterer, commander I've never seen before. It's interesting. So when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, I guess to avoid certain combos, you may search your library for a creature card mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield and shuffle. So it's a 3/1 for 3 mana. That can just go get Dryad Arbor and give you a land ramp. And then for any number greater than 0, you can get, like, Birds of Paradise. You can get whatever you want, right? Like within the red, green, white color combination. So maybe 2 mana, you go get like Stoneforge Mystic or something. So opponent has to mulligan twice. And I think I'm going first. And I get to rip into their hand in 2 ways. I decide, so... usually you lead off with Inquisition here, then you play your Mox and you Thoughtseize them, and you do Inquisition because you want to maximize the chance that there is a target for Inquisition. If you Thoughtseize them and the only target in their hand that you want to take costs 3 or less, or the only target in their hand costs 3 or less, and then there's no other targets, then you can't get value out of Inquisition. Typically it'd be something like you look at their hand and they have a 4-drop, a 3-drop, and a bunch of lands. And you Thoughtseize them, well, you got to take the 4-drop, and then you can play the thing and take the Inquisition. But let's say they have just a bunch of lands and a 3-drop. Well, you Thoughtseize them, you take the 3-drop, but now you have Inquisition, and it's less reliable over the course of the game. I'd rather have a Thoughtseize in the bank than have an Inquisition in the bank. So that's typically the reason why you'd lead off with Inquisition. However, I'm going to lead off with Thoughtseize here, and the reason is that they've mulliganed twice. So there's actually less of a chance of having a hit with the Inquisition. So I want to Thoughtseize. In case their hand's like 4 lands and a 4-drop, I want to Thoughtseize first. And then as long as they have 2 cards that I can target with Thoughtseize, and at least one of them costs 3 or less, I can still Inquisition them, no problem. So every turn, regardless of how automatic you feel like you're playing, like how you should be playing it on autopilot, you definitely want to consider sequencing as it's still something important in the game of Magic, right? So I'm going to lead off with Thoughtseize, and apparently my opponent probably kept one of those like Soul Ring hands or something, and just concedes on the spot. So that is perfectly fine. Maybe they had like Land Crypt Sylvan. I mean, that would have been a keepable hand. That would have been a great hand, actually. But either way, we'll never know. Maybe they had land tax or something, but whatever it was, they conceded before we got to see it. So Izuku Midoriya, 1968, is my next opponent here. And this opponent is playing, let's see what, Joda, Archmage Eternal. Opponent's playing blue, probably loses. It's kind of how it goes. I've got turn 1 kill, just like I did last game. And that's the thing, too, about playing the Inquisitions and stuff, is that because of the way the mulligan system works and because of the fact that when you do that precision disruption on turn 1, sometimes opponents do just concede. I mean, it is sometimes just lethal. So by running those cards, we actually have an increased rate of winning the game before the game starts. Really just emphasizing how much of a turn 1. I mean, look at how many of our games don't make it past turn 1. So anyway, from here, I'd love to lead off with the Saga, but it doesn't quite work out. The Amber only produces red. It's not like the Springleaf Drum that will produce mana of any color. It has to reflect mana back at you based on the color of eligible permanents you control. So we have to lead off with, I'm going to lead the Mox Amber, but I'm hoping that if my blue playing opponent sees the Mox Amber by itself, they might consider forcing it or something, thinking that they're going to disrupt my mana this turn. Alright, so that doesn't happen, so I'm going to test. I'm going to play Rograkh. Tap for 2 before we go any further and try calling the weak. It sticks. So Tevesh Szat comes down, and I make some thralls, play a Jeweled Lotus as a backup plan, and ship the turn. So this is what, you know, turn 1 looks like. Just a casual, I don't know, 6 permanents, 3 cards in hand, and 5 mana spent. No problem. And obviously that is, I mean, there's no point in playing that game out. That's Commander. No point in playing it out. Dot format. All right, what is this? A.B. Redstone Rothstein. I'm not quite sure what the name is meant to convey there. Abe Redstone Rothstein. That's what it is. Okay, got it. Abe Redstone Rothstein is playing Szat the Gifted. So interesting. Haven't seen this commander. Has some potential to do some gross things. Takes a little while to ramp up. Card obviously really wants you to have a Skull Clamp. And I've got a very nice disruptive fast hand. Slow you down, speed me up kind of hand. So this looks good. We'll keep this. Opponent is going first. Fortunately, doesn't lead off with anything too crazy, but if they did, you know, I drew a braid there also. Here's another thing. When you use your fetches, your red fetches only have 4 targets. Your black fetches, like Marsh Flats, have the same 4 targets minus the mountain, so 1, 2, 3 targets, plus 1, 2, 3 swamps. So black fetches have 6 targets, red fetches have 4. So when you use the fetch, if you have a choice between the red or black, you want to save your black ones because you don't want to fetch out all your targets and then have no targets. You want to burn the red ones first for the most part, right? No rule is absolute, but that's generally speaking what you want to do. And generally speaking, you want to avoid getting basic lands if you can, unless you're suspecting a opponent running Blood Moon, because you have Prismatic Vista in the stack and you can actually use other fetch lands to pull out your basics, and then you have no target for your Prismatic. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So just a little bit of management here. So lead off with Thoughtseize. I would play Crypt here with the land untapped. If my opponent led off with an island, I would consider, you know, how I played the turn. But at any rate, my opponent did not slam their mana Crypt against the black deck, so it is a Crypt that will go away. However, my opponent believes that they made a mistake and that this is going to cost them the game. They mentioned it towards the end. Of course, we know that I could have just went first turn to Braid your Crypt, and it would be the same outcome. But I will not disabuse them of the notion. All right, so there's my opponent's hand. Some cards, and yeah, Ragavan. So we'll go ahead and just play the Ragavan there, and just sit on the Crypt for now. Feeling okay. I don't necessarily need to expose it. I don't think that I'm going to have to braid anything this turn based on what I've seen in my opponent's hand. I'm going to play Sword of Truth and Justice. I could have played Ragavan with dash or whatever, but if I don't have to dash it in and it didn't look like I needed to, then I won't, because I'd rather it stay in play and not tax me for a little bit of mana every turn. Plus, this is an opportunity for me to just go ahead and get the Sulphurous Mine. Of course, if I had played the Mana Crypt, I could have abraded the sword, but frankly, the sword doesn't do too much yet, and so there's time to get around to that. Deadly Rograkh is just awesome. So before I play a land, of course, I'm going to hit with Ragavan and see what I see, and I actually see a Mox Opal, which is great. I'll just sneak that into play, so suddenly I have tons of mana going. So I still haven't played a land yet. Decided to finally play the Graven Cairns, only because I want to protect my treasure token. I play Tevesh, Rograkh, draw some cards, find my own Mox Opal and a Ritual and a Vandal Blast. So I could certainly continue with the turn here, but I'm feeling pretty solid. I don't want to play my Mox and kill theirs. I can sit tight for a little while, so we'll just do that. The only argument for playing the Mox might be if I thought that I was going to run out K-Command, just to have it untapped and ready to go, but not feeling like I need to, and I do have a Braid after all and Deadly Rograkh, so this seems okay. Alright, opponent plays Great Furnace. Love to see it when you're holding Vandal Blast. And Szat the Gifted, so this is their hand, and get rid of their commander. They're going to go ahead and make themselves a flyer. I'm obviously not super worried about what's going on over there. But I don't want to start hitting with a sword of anything. And I also want to make some room for Ragavan to get in there. So we'll lead off with VB. And that sticks, taking out Great Furnace, Servo, the sword, and then we get to hit the opponent and start playing some more of their cards. And deal with the Saheeli the Gifted in a bit. I'm sure the many Ancestral Recalls and disruption of the deck will ultimately find me a solution, or I'll find it from my opponent's deck. But opponent concedes and says, hey, I made a misplay. He feels as though holding the Mana Crypt was the reason that the game was not won. And of course we know that's not the case, but totally understand it. So they jump back into a game again. The reason that the game is not won, incidentally, is because you don't have to really have... you don't have to worry about anything else except producing fast mana so that you can cast Tevesh, Szat, and win the game. And that's problematic. So I do have to mulligan that first hand. The second hand, I'm thinking like, oh, this would have been really good, but it's another one that's a mulligan. It's just not quite, doesn't quite come together. Third hand, okay, there we go. Nice fast start. I have to tuck away a few cards. That's fine. And just loaded with mana, right? Like all I need is mana. I don't need strategy. All I need is mana, because all of my strategy is always at hand. It's always available, because, as I said, the worst part of Commander is, unfortunately, the Commander, which allows you to just do crazy, ridiculous things here. I'm going to go ahead and vamp and pick up I want to make sure I hit a land drop here. My opponent doesn't need to know that I'm missing lands. Normally that would be Crypt, but in this case, it's just fine as a tomb. And I'll go ahead and just run out just enough mana to play Tevesh, Szat, and then I will Tidings myself for 0. Boop. And yeah, there's a Crypt anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and just play the Crypt and use the Crypt to replay another Tidings and pass for the turn. So this seems like a fair, turn 2. Nice Soul Ring you got there, right? Alright, for my opponent's turn, we run out Astral Cornucopia, which is basically like a Mox Opal that costs way too much mana. Alright, we'll go ahead and flip for Crypt and get my Tidings on. And there's Anger's Rampage. I'd love to kill Soul Ring or Cornucopia, but they also have Seed of the Synod. And I haven't found any of my multi-artifact kill. In fact, my hand is kind of anemic. It's just tons of mana and mana production, right? So a very unlucky start, but I'll go ahead and make him sack an artifact anyway, just to slow him down. I do get the Seed of the Synod taken care of. And then from here, I'm going to use my mana to play Tidings again. And pass for the turn. Alright, so my opponent can definitely get their commander down now and chooses to do exactly that. Then uses the ability to make spells cheaper, so they get a discount of 2 on their next spell. And plays a Sculpting Steel, which allows them to get another Soul Ring. So my opponent is really ramping up. I need to find removal quickly, but this deck is loaded, and I've already drawn 6 extra cards, so maybe when I draw another 3 extra, maybe I'll find a solution. Well, I don't find anyone there, but let's see the other 3 to go with my 4 cards, and nope, nothing. Alright, well, it's unfortunate. I believe, yes, we are in bugged game territory. That's frustrating. That's not what happened at all. What I actually drew was Rack and Ruin and like Yawgmoth's Will or something, and just went completely ape here and blew away basically all of my opponent's permanents. I Rack and Ruined away their Soul Rings, Yawg-willed, like Ritualed, willed, replayed the Lotus, Anger's Rampaged away Saheeli, and like before I could finish the turn, my opponent conceded, and I believe that's what causes the bug game. It's when they concede that as you're playing your turn out, and then the game just randomly substitutes cards. But yeah, all this disappeared, and some of the cards up here disappeared, plus I tutored for what I wanted. That's what actually happened. But at any rate, unfortunately that last game bugged out, but you can see that Bull Szat is really truly a bunch of Bull Szat. This is kind of all the nasty, and like I said, remember this is a land over here, so we actually are running 32 lands. But if you actually look at the number of mana sources in the deck, what you'll see is if I sort by color and we take out things that are not mana sources, so these can find mana because they can draw cards or whatever, grab some mana from the sideboard, but everything else, even Crucible, once you have a land in the graveyard and so forth, this is all, Skull Clamp's not mana source, although it's a pretty amazing card draw. Expedition Map essentially is mana, right? So everything else in that pile is mana plus this card here. And so what we're running is 52 mana sources plus tutors, not counting like the mana that you could possibly get from Ragavan or from Dark Ritual, Calling the Weak, right? Demonic Tutor or Imperial Seal. So 50% mana in a deck with only 32 lands is really kind of crazy. It's really kind of crazy, but the reason we run so much mana is just because when you draw 3 cards per turn, the only thing that slows you down is lack of access to mana, right? So if you can draw, can you play them? And so that's where the mana situation comes into play. So the answer with this deck is pretty consistently yes. And that is all I've got. Hopefully you enjoyed the deck. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it. If you have any questions about card selection or comments about card selection, I would love to hear them in the comments. Any ideas on how to make this deck even dumber than it already is, please let me know. If you don't know what to cut, like you could say, hey, I think this card's not good in there, or hey, I think this card belongs in there, or hey, I think you should swap these 2 cards in there, or whatever. Anything like that, all of it's good. And let me know if you like watching the games with this deck. I mean, it is kind of fun to see how powerful it is, but is it too boring, like just watching people concede on turn 1? Or is it like kind of cool just watching that happen over and over again with the occasional game that goes long and then we just do the other things that the deck does. So I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. I look forward to more games against some of the more difficult opponents. I expect the deck will get some losses in. It certainly is capable of losing to anything gross, as I showed in the start against Colosseum earlier, and I've lost to Dots and I've lost to others. But overall, I believe the win record for the deck is extremely, extremely high. I think in the last 30 days. When did we put this together? I think, was it on, I don't remember when the deck was put together, but basically the win-loss ratio on the deck has been pretty high, and at one point it was struggling a little bit, but there was a lot of like clunky stuff. I had, for example, Lion's Eye Diamond in here, like Lotus Petal effects and stuff, and just kind of realized that it's a little all in. You run LED, you're kind of all in. You take that game where I got Force of Willed and replace the any of the cards with Lion's Eye Diamond, and imagine that I LED'd into a Force of Will, and I'm just dead on the spot, right? So for that reason, I took it out. Maybe that's a mistake. I don't know. I had Wheel of Fortune in here. I took it out. I was feeding my opponent cards. I mean, this is a discard deck too, and I didn't need the cards myself. I draw tons of cards, so I just other than like being a combo card with Jessica's Will, it generally speaking wasn't all that good. A couple times I played Wheel of Fortune, ended up losing because I played Wheel of Fortune. Yeah, I think that's about it. So anyway, without much more to say, I look forward to your comments. I look forward to the discussion, and I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.